The organ is perhaps the most complex and intimidating of musical instruments. Despite being a keyboard instrument, that is about where the similarity between the organ and the piano ends. However, as Johann Sebastian Bach once said, there's nothing remarkable about it. All one has to do is hit the right keys at the right time, and the instrument plays itself. Well, perhaps Mr. Bach was just a bit overzealous in his statement. A transition from the piano to the organ may seem straightforward at first, but there are a few traps for the unwary. But don't despair. With a basic understanding of the instrument and its controls, as well as some basic playing techniques, you will be well on your way to mastering the King of Instruments. During this presentation, we will discuss various controls on the console, the divisions of the organ, the families of sound, and finally, the art of registration and selecting the appropriate stops. So let's get started with some basic terminology. This piece of furniture is called the console, and it is the control center for the organ. This particular organ is called a three-manual organ because it has 3 keyboards or manuals, which are played by the hands. On the floor, we have a very large keyboard called a pedal board that is played by the feet. My associate, Jonathan, has put together an entire presentation that focuses on learning how to play the pedals. On either side of the manuals, we have the stops. The stops turn on and off the various sounds of the organ. In this organ, we have draw knobs that are used to control the stops. Pulling the draw knob turns on the stop. Pushing the draw knob back in turns off the stop. And now you know where the phrase, pulling out all the stops, came from. On some instruments, the stops may be lighted. On this particular instrument, the stops are turned on by pushing on the tab. They are turned off the same way. Couplers do just what their name implies. They hook things together. In this case, it's keyboard to keyboard. They are often grouped together across the back rail above the top manual. The couplers allow you to add all of the sounds from one division or manual to the sounds of another manual. For example, by using the swell to great coupler, we can take the reed sounds found on the swell division and add them to the great principal chorus by using the swell to great coupler. If you are playing along and you want to change just 1 or 2 stops at a time, you certainly can do that. However, if you need 10 or 20 stops on each side, you can't just grab them and keep on playing. And that is why we have all of the little round buttons in between the manuals. They are called thumb pistons. As the organist, you can set many of these pistons so that the stops change exactly in the way that you have preset them, which allows for you to quickly make significant changes in the sound. There are many different types of thumb pistons on this organ. We have general pistons, which affect all of the stops and couplers on the organ and are typically located on the left side of the manuals. There are also divisional pistons, which only affect the stops on that particular manual. They are usually located in the middle of the manual. Other thumb pistons may also include reversibles, which actuate couplers or other special functions. They are called reversible because the first time you press it, it turns on the function. The next time you press it, it turns that function back off. And of course, you will usually have a set and cancel piston. The set piston is used to set your selected registration to the piston of your choice. The cancel piston clears all the stops and couplers. Related to the thumb pistons are the toe pistons. These are located just above the pedals and can be pressed by the feet. It is customary for some or all of the general thumb pistons to be duplicated by toe pistons on the left side of the console. So pressing thumb piston 10 is the same as pressing toe piston 10. On the right side of the console are more toe pistons. These are typically divisional pistons that only affect stops in the pedal division. Finally, we have the expression or swell pedals. These control the volume of each of the divisions of the organ. Opening the pedal makes the sound louder, and closing the pedal makes the sound softer. Some organs may also have a crescendo pedal, which, unlike the expression pedals, it incrementally activates stops as it is opened in order from quietest to loudest. The crescendo pedal is used only in certain repertoire, and generally speaking, the organ's expression pedals are more commonly used. So those are most of the controls on the organ. The next thing to understand are the pitches of various stops. Most stops will have a 16, 8, 4, or 2 on them. This number refers to the length of the longest pipe in that rank, which is keyed when you play low C on that keyboard. A stop that has 8 foot in its name is the same pitch as the piano. In other words, when I play middle C on an 8 foot stop, it is the same as playing middle C on the piano. Whereas a stop that has a 4 foot in its name is 1 octave higher than the piano. A stop that is at 2 foot is 2 octaves higher than a piano. And a stop that has a 16 in its name is 1 octave lower than the piano. Low C on the keyboard plays the pipe whose length matches its name. Here's an example of low C on a 16-foot pipe. Mutations are stops that play at a 3rd or 5th interval. They are easy to identify because their pitches end in fractions. For example, this organ has a 2 2/3 stop that plays at a 5th above the 4 foot stop. Here's the 4 foot stop. Here's the 2 2/3. The 1 3/5 stop plays a 1/3 above the 2 foot stop. Here we have the 2 foot stop, and here is the 1 3/5 stop. Now, let's take a look at the various divisions of the organ and why we have so many keyboards. The stops of the organ are divided into sections that we call divisions, and each division is usually played from its own keyboard or manual. The divisions can also be located in different places within the room, perhaps even in the back of the church. This permits contrasting tonal colors from the various keyboards. And the nice thing about having multiple manuals is that tone color changes may be made simply by moving your hands to another manual without having to change the stops. As you can see, having 3 manuals actually makes the music easier to play. Now let's turn our attention to the different divisions of the organ. The great division is the main division of the organ. It is generally the lower manual on a 2-manual instrument and the middle manual on a 3-manual organ. The other manuals can usually be coupled to the great, so the loudest sounds are played on it. This division provides the foundation for the organ and is sometimes unexpressed. It will almost always contain some sort of principal or diapason chorus, which consists of stops at 8, 4, 2 2/3, 2, and perhaps a mixture. The mixture is usually quite large, which helps provide pitch definition for congregational singing. There is also usually several large-scale flute stops, and depending on the size of the organ, you may or may not find reeds on this division. The swell division is so called because the sound can be made to swell and diminish through the use of the swell expression pedal. Its stops play from the upper manual on most 2 and 3 manual instruments. The swell division often has more stops than the great division. And the swell division usually consists of a smaller principal chorus than the great, but most importantly, it contains many color stops. These include the flute stops at many pitch levels, even 16-foot. It will usually have mutations as well, which allow you to make a cornet, a set of string stops, and of course the fiery reeds. Because of the variety of sounds within this division, it has the greatest musical flexibility. The choir division is usually played from the bottom manual on a 3-manual instrument. It also may be expressed with the expression pedal to the left of the swell expression pedal. The stops on this division are intended to accompany the choir, to accompany solo stops on the swell, and to provide soft, ethereal sounds for service playing. This may include some light flute stops, a color reed or 2, and often an Erzähler or Erzähler Celeste. This division is also sometimes called the positive division when it is not expressed. The pedal division is played from the pedal board. It is typically one of the smaller divisions of the organ. It is based on the 16-foot tone and provides a foundation to the manuals. A large organ such as this has a complete principal chorus in the pedal with principals at 16, 8, 4, and a mixture. Even a small instrument will have flutes at 16 and 8-foot for the soft bass accompaniments. There is usually a 16-foot reed in the pedal, which helps bring out the bass line in a full combination, but is typically never used by itself. On a larger instrument, you may even find a complete reed chorus, such as we have here. As organists, one of the most important skills that must be learned is organ registration. Registration is the art of selecting the appropriate stops to create the desired sound. The first step to effective registration is to understand the families of sound in a classical church organ. All of the stops on the organ typically fall into one of 4 families. Let's take a closer look at each of these families of stops and what makes each so special. The first family of sound is called the principal or diapason family. These stops are the foundation upon which the organ is built, and it is a sound that is indigenous only to an organ. The principal or diapason stops make an ah sound. The 8-foot diapason on the great is the most important sound on the organ. The principal or diapason stops are well suited to accompany congregational singing in hymn playing. It is very common to add several principals of different pitch levels to form the principal chorus. The principal chorus is the basis for most hymn accompaniments and consists of the 8-foot principal or diapason, 4-foot octave, 2-foot 15th, and perhaps the 2 2/3 12th. The mixture is a very special part of the principal chorus. It is easy to identify the mixture stops because they have Roman numerals after their names. The Roman numeral indicates how many ranks of pipes are playing for every key that is pressed. The mixture stop should never be played alone, but it does add wonderful brilliance to the principal chorus. The next family of sound in the organ are the flutes. These stops imitate various instruments of the flute family. They produce a warmer and rounder sound than the principals due to their subdued overtones. It's more of an ooh sound. In meditative hymns, stops from the flute chorus might be substituted in place of the principal stops to minimize sharpness, especially at the 4-foot and 2-foot level. The string stops are especially important for the performance of slow and meditative organ music. The strings have a more subdued fundamental and well-developed overtones, making them sound much thinner than principals or flutes. They make an E sound. String stops often have a counterpart called a celeste, which is a string stop that is tuned slightly sharp or flat of its unison counterpart. When these two stops are combined, they produce a warm, undulating tone. The final family of sound in the organ are the wonderful reeds. The reed stops imitate the sound of reed instruments as well as brass instruments and cover a wide range of tonal colors. Reeds can be classified either as solo reeds, with very distinctive tone colors, or as chorus reeds, which are used to add fire and power to the principal chorus. The solo reeds can be used as a solo stop on a separate manual, accompanied in this case by the strings. The chorus reeds are generally louder and blend well with the principal chorus in both the pedals and manuals. Now that we have learned about the four families of sound, we can finally start putting it all together in the form of useful registrations for service playing. Let's start with the celestes. First, we will use the flute celeste on the swell. This is the softest stop on the organ. Because it is a very soft stop, we will accompany it with the softest 16 foot in the pedal. We will also use the chimes on the grate to provide a nice accent. For the next section, we will solo out the melody on the swell cornet. A cornet is made by combining the flute stops at the pitches of 8 foot, 4 foot, 2 2/3, 2, and 1 3/5. The combination of these 5 flute stops creates a unique sound that is ideal for solo melodies. Because of the nature of this tune, we will add a tremulant to the cornet. We will then accompany the cornet with the Erzähler and Erzähler Celeste on the choir. And just to add a little more interest, I have set the swell 8 foot oboe and 4 foot flute on swell divisional piston 4. This way, I can make a quick change to the oboe while playing. Let's see how this works out. Let's take a look at how to use some of the other solo stops on the organ. For this next tune, we will start with the choir strings, which will accompany the 4 foot flute on the swell. We have preset the swell 8 foot oboe on swell divisional piston 4, which we will use as well. We also need to set up a general piston that has the 8 and 4 foot flutes on both the swell and choir, as well as the great 8 foot diapason, 8 foot gamba, which is a string stop, and the 8 foot borden. This combination on the grate will be for soloing out the melody. I have already set this up on General Piston 7. Okay, so we have explored the many ways to solo out a melody using the various solo stops. Now it's time to take a look at proper registration for a hymn. First and foremost, remember that the 8-foot diapasons provide the foundation. However, since the congregation sings at the 8-foot pitch, it is hard for them to hear the organ if you only play on 8-foot stops. Therefore, the 4-foot pitch is key to good congregational singing as it defines the pitch. Let's listen to just the 8-foot diapason on the grate. Now let's add the 4-foot octave and try it again. You can hear much better pitch definition with the 4-foot octave added. Now we'll add the 16-foot pedal diapason. As you can hear, the pedal really adds some foundation to the sound. Typically, you should use pedal stops that are an octave lower than what is being used in the manuals. For example, if you are using 8-foot stops in the manuals, you will want to use 16-foot stops in the pedal. If you are using 8 and 4-foot stops in the manuals, you will want to use 16 and 8-foot stops in the pedal. For a congregational hymn, I typically will use 8-foot and 4-foot diapasons on all divisions coupled to the grate. And then if I need more weight, I will also add the 8 and 4-foot flutes. Let's take a look at what that sounds like. As you build up the registration from that point, start by adding the softest 2-foot stop. You will have to experiment with your particular instrument. The softest 2-foot stop may be on the choir or on the swell. Then you can progressively add the bigger 2-foot stops. For even more sound on a big festive hymn, don't be afraid to add the 8-foot reed from the swell, or perhaps one of the mixtures. However, make sure not to add too much mixture tone without having enough foundation to support it. Finally, don't use celestes or tremulants while accompanying congregational singing, as it makes it very difficult for the congregation to determine the correct pitch to sing. Let's watch as I play a hymn and build it up, starting first with just the 8 and 4-foot diapasons and flutes, then adding the 2-foot stops, the mixture, and the reed chorus. A few more tips about making registration changes, whether you make them by turning on or off the stops manually or by pressing pistons. It is important that you practice this before trying it during a church service. Registration changes should always have rhythm. In other words, treat them like a note. Mark them in your score on the exact beat that they should occur and practice them that way. Also, you do not want registration changes to occur in the middle of a phrase. Let's watch again as I play another hymn build-up and watch how the registration changes are very rhythmic. So just to recap, here are some valuable points to remember when playing hymns. First, the diapason or principal choruses provide the foundation. Generally, you want to use 8 and 4-foot stops at a minimum for hymn playing. Add the 2-foot stops as necessary for more clarity. Mixtures will add brilliance, whereas reeds will add more energy to the sound. And finally, I typically do most of my hymn playing on the great division, so I will need to use couplers to add the sounds from the other divisions to the great. I hope this presentation has given you a better understanding of the organ and in particular organ registration. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email us at the address on your screen. While the organ is a sophisticated instrument with many controls, the more time you have with the instrument, you will get more comfortable and it will become second nature. Remember, have patience, practice slowly, and most important, have fun making music.